Well, welcome back if you regularly watch our conversations, and welcome to you if this is your first time. In these times, Simon and I sit down and talk together about the things that matter most to us in an unscripted, unplanned way, other than agreeing what we're going to start talking about, and then we see where it goes. We'd love to have you with us, just to be like a fly on the wall, but hopefully a fly on the wall that takes a real interest in the things that we talk about.
One of those things that I thought would be lovely to talk about is faith, what faith is, what faith means, because it is one of those things which is part of living in a love relationship with God. So again, I thought it'd be lovely just to talk about it. And I always, it's in your book. I always remember the photo of you standing by the pillar outside the Bible College of Wales with the inscription, "Faith is substance." Yeah. And it always struck me, just because humanly doesn't necessarily feel that faith is substance. So on one hand, you know how crucial faith is, and yet faith can almost feel like a bit of an ethereal something that's intangible, therefore so that it's flimsy. So that simple statement, faith is substance, always struck me. So I thought it'd be lovely just to start with that and just talk about that.
I like that because it is fundamental. And it's funny, isn't it? Like from the time that anyone, not even people that necessarily, if they go to church even, let alone actually come into a real relationship with God, faith, even Bible colleges, churches, other religions talk in terms of faith. Faith is sort of almost a word that's become synonymous with religion rather than what faith really is. And it's not just something that you believe, because also it can be synonymous with a creed of belief, like a doctrine or which faith do you belong to? And that's actually a really misleading thing, because there's a beautiful verse in the Bible, and I'm quoting from the King James Version, that without faith it's impossible to please God. Now faith isn't like what do you believe about something, it's really who do you believe in and what do you do with that belief. So I really like it that you quoted that verse that's actually, it's part of a verse of the Bible, this wonderful verse that I love, again from the King James Version, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So when you think of faith having substance, like you say, it's very different to thinking like faith is some kind of airy-fairy or ethereal thing that it's kind of a feeling like, even when someone can say to someone, "I've got faith in you," what does that actually mean? But when we're talking about God and what real faith is firstly, it presupposes that you know something that God has spoken to your heart, or in some way God has revealed something to you that therefore requires a response from you. Because when God speaks, sometimes he'll speak to our hearts, sometimes he'll speak to us through situations, sometimes you might read something in the Bible, but whatever it is, when you belong to him, when God has said something to your heart. It can be through another person who just knows that there's something they want to say to you, and when they say it, deep down, this is more than just with the words of a man. God has just spoken to my heart. What do you do with that? And do you just take it as something to read about, think about, consider? And I love the fact that God never speaks to us for our information. God speaks to us for our response. Faith always requires a response. And the response of faith, to me, is the first thing of substance. Because the thing is, like, when I make a decision and I make a response based on something that I know God has made clear or real to me, that's got to be a tangible thing on my part. But that then makes the way for God to bring about tangible things in response to my faith, my belief in him. And why I loved seeing that at the Bible College of Wales back in 1971 was the reason why that pillars, something like a stone pillar was there with that on, because that thing's got substance. It's talking about faith being substance, because the story of Rees Howells, the man of God through whom the Bible College came into existence, but many other wonderful things that he experienced in his life, are that he believed God and he had faith in what God said and the way God led him. And God was able to do tangible things. I mean, the very buildings that I saw there that had been bought or built by faith were evidence of faith having substance. And for me, even by then, the way that I'd lived and moved and travelled on the journey to Russia, because by the time I was in Wales, I'd been to Russia and I was on the return journey home. The tangibility of all those things, that when you don't have money and you're going to do something God wants you to do, and you believe in God and God makes a way for you to have the money, that's, there's not much that's, although in the days of digital currency and cryptocurrency, you can think it doesn't have much substance, but money, even if you haven't got cash in your hand, like money buys things of substance, therefore, and it's because it does have substance, it does have value. If we hear from God, then he never speaks to us to make us feel good, or like I said before, just to give you something to think about. He requires a response, and he expects a response. And whatever that means, and I love the fact that you can look across the board, you can look through the history of God's people in the Bible, you can look at the New Testament church, but in the history of God's people since Jesus, there are so many examples, and people have them in their lives if they live by faith with God. They discover that faith is substance. But as with everything, if you're going to believe God, then you're going to have to put all your weight on what God says. You can't hedge your bets. You can't say, well, I think God's saying this, and I might give that one a try and see how it goes. Firstly, know whether God has spoken to you. And if you know God's spoken to you, and you're honest about it and you know it, then that requires something of you. And whatever that response requires will lead not only to the initial substance response from you, because you actually have to tangibly give God your response, that whether it costs you something, commits you to something, whether it's words or there's something even more so in a price that you pay, something that you are committed to of substance. God doesn't just do these things to try you out. It's to lead to something that only God himself can do.
Yeah, I think, again, when you're speaking in Slavic, because it is about, again, a love relationship. Like, faith doesn't exist separate to relationship. It's because, like I say, it's God speaking to you, God that you know, and even the way you're expressing it, like it's your response to God, because it's not, I'll decide to have faith in, and I'll believe that God will do this for me. Like, it's when God has said something to you, God has stirred your heart, like say, however, through someone else, something you've read in the Bible, and it's your response to that. And so it's a real active thing.
Yes.
And so again, it's all part of that, like when we're talking about hearing from God, it's all part of that same love relationship, but it actually gives you something to give, again, because God chooses, because in a sense, I mean, God doesn't need you to believe it for it to come to pass.
No.
But he chooses, because it's about relationship, that's the way it's going to be, that he says it. And I love it. I mean, I think the bit that always is probably the challenging part is, okay, I know for myself, like, I'd always like more. I mean, again, I don't want to keep referring to your Russian trip, but on your Russian trip, happened between you and God, where almost like I just like another little confirmation, and God says, "What like it?" But it doesn't matter how many confirmations do you need? But even there's that reality too, isn't there? Like, because, like, again, we often say, if I saw it, printed on the wall, if I knew for sure, like, so I think, I would believe if, but then that's not faith.
No.
That's not belief. Like, when you say it's the evidence of what you don't see. It's the hope of what's to come. And so that of course you can't get away from the personal, love relationship side of it with you and God. That it's it's your response to give. Yeah, it's not like, well, once it gets to this level,
Yeah.
then I believe, because I think by nature we tend to want to do as I see it coming, now just as that, now I believe.
Yeah.
Where it's actually something lovely that just because God said it, that's all I need. Like that's actually mine to give.
Yeah.
If I want to give, like that's actually what frees God in your life. Actually it's that was God, and I'm willing to risk everything, like say, on that.
Yeah.
And like the fact that, in a sense, it is a risk, because I could be wrong, but I believe that's God, and that's because of who He is to me. Again, I think by nature I'm more risk averse. But it's like, on one hand it feels risky, but it's not risky because it's God that we're talking about with it, which is something.
And that's why I love what you said about the relationship, because you can't start believing a God that you don't know.
No, sure.
Because what does that mean?
No.
And it, like, having faith presupposes that God has spoken to you, to your heart, or however He spoke to you, which then presupposes that you know Him, and you know what it is to hear from Him. And because I've often said that God always speaks to us in a voice that we can hear, in a language that we can understand, then that's the God that I know. But as you know, like, because many years ago when I was a young Christian, I read a saying of the pioneer missionary, the famous man C.T. Studd, and his famous saying was, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it." And for him, like, all I need to know is that God said something, and if God has said it, then I believe it. And if I believe it, that does settle it, like there is no other question. And even when we talk about faith being the substance of things hoped for, that hope is not hope as we use it in our present usage, which is a maybe, like I hope things are going to work out okay. It's a will be. And God says, I will do this, and that gives me a hope. But that's what the Bible calls a sure hope. It's not a maybe hope. So, okay, now having had something from God, I know that God has said He will do this if I will believe Him. And so then there's substance in that, because when I embrace what God has said, and whatever that requires of me to act on that or to commit to something, then God will do the thing that I started off believing and having a sure hope about. And it's at that point that many people, because we're so used to living in such a world of tangibles and material things and everything we can see, feel, touch, smell, etc., that is something that our minds can't get around. But our minds aren't meant to get around that, because it's what we know in our hearts, or if you like, in our spirits. Which brings me back again. You've got to have experienced God before you can have faith. And to experience God means it's such a subjective thing. And I know it's one of the things that people often struggle with, because they say, well, like, how do I know I've experienced God? How do I know how to experience God? But if you think of the God of the whole universe, who made us for Himself, who created us in His image, and you think it means everything to Him to have relationship with each and every one of us. Like, there's never been a human being who's walked this earth that God hasn't wanted to have that kind of relationship with. Then God makes it His business. If we open our hearts to this God that we don't know, and we say, I want to know you on your terms, then God has amazing ways of making Himself known to us. And it isn't necessarily tangible to anyone but you, but it will be tangible to you. Once you meet God, once God meets you, if you like, at the point of your desire for Him, be sure you want that, because from that point on, you can say it didn't happen, but you really can't deny it happened. And God knows that you know it, and you really know it, that it's happened too. But then what are you going to do about it? Because it's a relationship, it's a constant interaction, like any relationship between any two people. It's not just, okay, this happened, I'm set for life. So from then on, your life can't be about yourself. It has to be about God, which means that God will often speak to your heart, He'll stir your heart, He'll say things to you, He'll show you things. And those things aren't something for you to just have a good feeling about, or save up, or talk about. They're things to live in. as you know, Jesus said that for him, his meat was to do the will of his Father. How did he know his Father's will? Not because his Father gave him a script before he came and lived among us. He discovered his Father the same way we discover God the Father, by living daily with him, by making God the focus of his life. And that way, he just had to live by faith just as much as we now live by faith. But that's, when I say had to, it's almost like, that can sound like it's almost a chore, like, oh boy, I'm saddled with having to believe God. It's the most wonderful thing to have a God that you can believe, the God who created the whole universe, the God who still is the Lord of the whole universe, and to think that he wants that relationship with me, and if I respond to him, then all of his love and all of his power can come into play to do whatever he wants to do that he's spoken to me about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is that personal, like I say, it's that believing that, because it's easy to believe that, well, I think always of somebody else, or someone you think, oh yeah, he'd be the kind of person, or she would be the kind of person, that God, but that God really wants that. And that, again, because we tend to think, God spoke to me about this, I believed God for a situation. But from God's perspective, it's actually just, it's drawing you closer to himself. Like, he wants you to know him. And often that's how he is revealed, isn't it? Like, he's revealed through the situations and through what he does. And we can tend to be, we tend to, again, because we see the physical, oh great, God provided this, God opened up that, God, healed, cured this, God. And in a sense, it is about that, but it's for God, it's not about that. It's, he's wanting you to, to draw you closer to him. And in a sense, faith, which is a response to his word, whether you realize or not, takes you closer to him and draws you into him. Because they say, because it's relational, he wants you to know him. He doesn't want you to know about him. He wants you to actually know him. And he wants you to know him. He wants me to know him. He wants everyone to know him. Because part of love is wanting to know the other person and wanting to be known. Like say, like intimately, honestly, vulnerably, to draw us. And I think it's lovely to realize that faith is what enables us to, if it was metaphorically, take another step further into God, and again, always into this God who loves us, that we don't know, and it enables us to move further into him, which is what he loves, which is loves intimacy, but then loves more intimacy and more intimacy, and there's never oh, that's enough intimacy. There's always more. Again, which we know in personal relationships. But I mean, obviously, because it all starts with our relationship with God, and any other relationship we have is only a reflection of that same love relationship which God is.
Well, when you think, like in 1 Corinthians 13, the famous love chapter, when Paul talks about love, but he says that there are three things that will remain forever, right through eternity. Other gifts, other spiritual things will pass away, because when they're no longer needed in this life, when this life ceases and we spend eternity with God. But the three things that will never pass away are faith, hope, and love. And so faith is believing God now. Hope is believing God for the thing that he said will be. But love, because Paul said the greatest of those three things is love. Because at the heart and the core of any faith is love. And if you don't know God and do not know what it is to love him, to live in an intimate relationship with the God who Jesus said you're to love with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, then you don't have a basis for faith. And unfortunately, I think that's the thing that is least emphasized so often, has been least emphasized traditionally by Christians. Because like in my own experience of being taught how to serve God, being taught how to do the things, godly things, being taught lots and lots of things from the Bible, but no one led me into loving God. He had to do that. And I discovered what it is to have a love relationship with him. But what you're saying is that's at the core of faith. Sure. If you want to know what it is to believe God, find out what it is to love God in response to his love for you, and then believing God, because this is a living, I was going to say a living being, but the most wonderful living being in the whole universe, who can hold the universe in the palm of his hand because he created it, that He wants an intimate love relationship with me is not only mind-boggling. Our minds can't even begin to grasp that.
No.
And yet, in our heart, right at the core of our being, we can experience it.
Yep.
Even when I'm talking about it like now, it's almost like, words don't do it justice. There's no concept but with God must always be experienced. Because we either go through life experiencing God or experiencing ourselves, because we are either subjectively involved, focused on ourselves, or we are outwardly focused, outwardly and upwardly, if you like, focused on God, where our lives are either going inward or going outward to God. And that's the deception with, again, particularly the present day obsession with me and with self, and with even, people say, be the best version of yourself that you can be. Look after yourself, and that actually takes us away from God. And there's nothing. I've got to somehow discover a way of having faith in myself, because I'm told that I am the center of my own universe, whereas God says, I am the center of the universe, and live your life in total relationship with me.
Join me.
And that takes us beyond ourselves in a way that we could never conceive of. And I mean really beyond ourselves, not just conceptually, not just in our minds or with feelings or anything, in reality. And that's amazing in itself.
It is.
But that's what we're made for. We were made by God to share his life.
Well, even what you just said there about God, love with God is meant to be experienced, and in a sense, that's the importance of faith, is because it's what enables you to experience it. Because without that, they say, it almost is like, oh yeah, I could understand that. You can understand the principles, and I could see how that could be true.
Yeah.
Or I can read, in the Bible, or because you can see someone's, God said it, they believed it, and this happened. But that's still not me experiencing it. They say I am become someone who can talk about it, but God doesn't want to be known or talked about. He wants to be experienced. I mean, like anyone in any real love relationship wants to. Right? I want you to experience my love, and I want to experience your love, and so I say that's the importance of faith, isn't it? Because it takes that the truth, the love relationship, and makes it real in your life. And so it actually is experience, and looking back on our own lives, well, that's been the key, isn't it? When I was prepared. So in that sense, that the faith is what I have to give in response to a relationship, that then makes it real, that then gives me more love, and so it's lovely, because it is that going backwards and forwards always between you and God, and so they say it's not. God is, if you go back 60 years plus, how much more real, I mean, God was real to you then, more real than you'd ever known, but in the 60 years plus, he's just become more and more real, but not because you've read more about him, or, but because, in faith you've responded to him, and so you have and will just keep experiencing more of God and who he is, and so in that way he's more real to you. And so it always feels, I know, inadequate expressing it in words, but that's who God is. He's more real to you than he's ever been. Simply because of one of the key elements has been just your faith responses to him. But again, it has to be continuous. You can't look back and say, I made that, I made that faith response, years ago. It's the faith responses that you continue to make to him. So,
and you can't live in past things, and neither can you live on other people's experiences, because, like, to me these days, like, you can go to a big Christian bookstore, or you can go online, or you can read the Bible, and you can read of other people's experiences of God, and you can try and get something from that. But that's, God doesn't relate in a second-hand way. The difference between inspiration and revelation is fundamental, because God reveals himself to us if we allow him to. Jesus said that the Father's desire was to reveal himself to us. That's why he sent his Spirit. And so that's a very personal thing. But again, then when you have that revelation, when your eyes are opened to who God is, who he is to you, then the freshness of that, the reality of that, just sweeps away so much else. because otherwise people are too often looking for inspiration and the basis for believing God, like hear someone else's story, read someone else's story, share someone else's, or get someone else to share their experience of God so that you can be encouraged. But ultimately, none of those things of themselves do it. None of those things will replace, because it's almost like saying, well, God doesn't speak to people anymore. God spoke to people in the past, or he spoke to people in different situations, and I've just got to glean what I can from other people's experience.
Yeah.
But you never know God that way, and you never actually live by faith that way, because faith must come out of this personal relationship with God, where you are experiencing him in your life, and living with God in that way gives him the freedom to speak to you, to guide you, to make himself your God in the way that God so incredibly, because he is God, he wants to have that intimate, personal, peculiarly personal relationship with every human being, if they let him. And there's no generic relationship with God. There's no pattern for it, which so often people look for, because that's what religious systems create, that if you're a devout person, this is what you'll do, and this is what you won't do, and this is how you'll express it. But if you live with God, then you discover, just like any two people falling in love and marrying and spending their lives together, just like any two people who live in love with one another, discover something unique that exists between them, that no matter how many similarities there are to other people, it's never the same thing as what they share with one another. And that's how God loves to be with each one of us.
Well, I think that's one of those things to really know and believe, that, like, say, God loves to reveal himself, and he wants to reveal himself to you and to me and to everyone. But like I say, because I think, again, it's almost like it's the lack of faith that, like, I want to understand it. Or maybe if I ask 10 people of it, if I ask 100 people, maybe if I ask 1,000, like, almost like I'll kind of do an identikit of, I can build up a picture of what God's like. And in a sense, you can do it. Like, it's not, that's true. And probably you'll get again, like they're doing that, you'll get a good resemblance of God, but you that's not what God wants. God wants to be known and to know you. He wants to reveal himself. He wants you to reveal yourself to you. Like, it really is that love relationship, which is, it's hard to wrap your mind around. But when you speak, I think, well, like you say, you just know the truth in your heart. Like, that's true, isn't it? Like, I know that. I know that's, I was created for that. And like I say, within me is that desire as well. Obviously, once you receive the Holy Spirit, you have God's Spirit inside of you, and it's true, isn't it? Like that. And so I think, well, when you say it just resonates, in your heart. Well, that really is what God has always desired. And I love the fact that it is. There'll be, if you could compare, write it all down, there would be similarities, but there'd be differences. Like there are. If you talked about your marriage and I talked about my marriage, there'd be similarities, but there's differences because it's two different people. And there's ways in which we're similar, ways in which we're different. And that's the joy of it for God, isn't it? Like that, where we tend to want to make it all the same for safety's sake. So, where God is not like that because he's God.
Yeah, that's right. And because he specifically made us as individuals, so that he could have that individual relationship with us. Like when I was a young Christian, I was given a book to read. I think it was called Heroes of the Faith. But because Christians love to hero worship. Like back in the early days of the church, it was sainthood. They'd set up certain people and say, this person is a saint. But actually, we're all supposed to be saints, which simply means someone who's set aside for God. Anyway. But then in this book, it was something more contemporary than that. It was like over the last 100 years or so, people who have been like spiritual giants who've done things for God. And that was supposed to inspire me. And I tried to emulate these people, there was one man who used to wake at 3 o'clock every morning and pray. And I thought maybe I should do that. And I tried doing that for a while, but I ran out of steam on that one before too long. And another person, if he was going to go to bed at night and he'd realised he'd never talked to anyone that day about Jesus, he'd get dressed, go out and walk the streets until he found someone to talk about Jesus. Then he can go to bed and sleep. And regardless of who the poor guy was that he might have cornered, just so that he could feel better about having done something for God. But the point of it is that all of those things are to try and find something to hang. Okay, well, if you do this, this person was was a great Christian for whatever reason, do what they did and you'll be like them. But if you went back into the story of each one of these people, you find they weren't trying to emulate anybody. They weren't trying to be anything but what that was a genuine expression of their relationship with God that they knew was what was in their hearts to do. And again, it's interesting how our natural tendency as humans is like find the one size that will fit all, find the thing that will suit my lifestyle or my view of life or what I want to be, and I'll be like that. When God's simply saying, come to me, know me, and discover what I want to be to you or who I want to be to you and how I want to be expressed in your life. But that requires putting yourself in God's hands. And that's not what is attractive to our natural human nature, because our human nature knows that means yielding up the control of my life. But that's part of relationship with God. He is Lord. He's the King of Kings. So you can't have that relationship with God without totally just giving yourself to his love, but also to his authority.
Well, and the fact that that's what he enjoys, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's for my sake, isn't it? It's almost, you see in movies, I think it's Dead Poets Society, everyone starts walking, then after a while everyone starts walking at the same pace because we all naturally are, what are you doing? So it gives you, like, in that way, I'm not sure about faith, but if you live by faith and you do that, or maybe if I do that, then that's a sign that I'm living by faith. And so it actually shows, it's a lack of faith in faith or a lack of belief in faith that for my sake causes me to want to, tell me, give me either the shortcuts, the sure way of doing it. Well, the sure way of doing it is because God says that. God says that's the way of doing it. So that's why it's the sure way. And so it actually shows my lack of belief in God that I almost want another way. And I say, if like say someone, it's their genuine expression of God, but once I copy it, it stops being a genuine expression of, because it's not a genuine expression of my love for God. There's nothing wrong with it. And and you might be two people who have the same genuine expression of God, but it's kind of trying to remove the individual, the dynamic side of the love relationship and make it more standard and fixed, which is not a love relationship anymore. And they say God has such, like saying about choice, God has such confidence in in the power of love, the power of choice, knowing all the risks. But that's what he loves. And I guess, which comes back again, if you know that and believe that God created us for this, then it's actually not a risk at all. Just again, which I guess is what faith is. What faith is when it feels risky or feels like you can't see the way, but God says there is a way. So I'll step out on that basis. And that's God created me for love relationship. He wants to have an intimate, personal love relationship with me. If knowing that, believing that, then that's there's actually just a relationship to be explored, a God to move into.
And that's what makes it so precious, because that's when you discover how personal it is. Like again, when I first opened my life to Jesus at that Billy Graham crusade in 1959, they talked about making a personal commitment to Jesus, making Jesus your personal saviour, which is true because it had to happen between me and him. But there wasn't anybody in my life in those early days who encouraged me or who gave me the lead as to live that personal life with him. Basically, once that happens to you, then you became part of the faceless crowd of people that are Christians, and you become part of the Christian subculture, and you actually lose your identity within that, and you learn what is the generic thing to do to be a Christian, what you do, what you don't do, and so on. But that should be the beginning. It's like falling in love with somebody. That's a one-on-one thing, but then that goes somewhere and it becomes beautiful and it becomes deeper, it becomes richer for as long as you both live. And with God, that's how it's meant to be, because then you discover what it is to have a God that you can believe in and keep believing in. And in that belief, it's not just believe God so that you'll get the tick of approval from God, but that you'll believe him and discover who he really is, because that takes you deeper and deeper into him. And the more you know him for who he is, and the more you respond to him, and the more you fall in love with him, the more he fills our lives. That's exactly what we were made for. But that actually doesn't fit in with the religious concept, either of God or what it is to belong to God.
No, but that's exactly what you described. That's why faith is substance.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they say it leads to that, which leads to more, which leads to more. And so you say, if you look back on your life, there's so much substance. The faith that you've experienced has so much substance to it. But if you go back to the beginning, you could say, well, no, I can't. Where's the substance?
That's right.
But I mean, you've in a sense by responding in faith, the substance, like God causes the substance to happen, so it gives you more and more. And so it's that lovely reality, isn't it? That you could, if you want to, you can always stand back and say, well, I can't see any substance, so I don't know what they're talking about. But you respond in faith, and it creates substance, which creates more substance, which creates more substance.
It does. There's nothing more solid than faith.
No,
that's the wonderful thing. It's rather than being an airy fairy kind of thing. It's actually the most substantial. Like to be able to live in this world, this material world, with God, with a God that you can't see, but that you know better than anyone that you can see, and to live in that love relationship with Him and discover that reality, and as you say, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, to be living a life of real substance is something that, again, our minds can't put together, but it's real. It shouldn't surprise us. It doesn't surprise us when we know God. But anybody looking on at something like that, or even hearing these words, who doesn't experience God like that, would say, no, like that's so intangible to me. Actually, it's the most tangible thing in the universe.
Yeah, I love that.
Me too.
It's great.